Reed Hastings, what a delight to get to speak with you.
Oh, it's a treat to be here, Chris. Wish it were in better times. We'll make the best of it. But we've been working on the book for 3 years, so it's great to have a chance to talk it through.
Yes, so you've come out with a very striking book, and we're going to dive into it. Before we go there, I want to check in with you, first of all, about just how Netflix has done during the pandemic. Everyone assumes, I think, that it's been a time of massive success for you. Everyone's suddenly got all this time to watch your content.
You know, during the first half of the year, we did grow from 170 million roughly to 195 million. So, it's good growth. Like Amazon, we're busy and we're super proud just to be part of people's escape and to be able to give them a little bit of pleasure in these very difficult times where people are stuck at home.
And beyond the growth in subscribers, what's been the growth in actual hours viewed?
Oh, pretty similar. I mean, the first 2 weeks, there was a big shock factor where nobody left the house at all. I think now, even though people are quarantined, they're, living more full lives. We've got sports that's on a little bit. So pretty normalized now.
I mean, has there been any concern that because it's so hard to produce content right now, that actually somehow people would exhaust a lot of the content that's right for them on Netflix, and that you're going to run into a big problem in a few months' time from just lack of content?
We'll have more original programming this year than we did last year, and we'll have more next year than we did this year. And the key there is our international growth and expansion, because in Europe right now, we're able to produce. In Canada, we're able to produce. In Australia, we're able to produce. So we're very diversified, and that's helping.
Reed, tell me a bit more about you. Before you co-founded Netflix, what was the story before then?
Unremarkable kid, went to college and found I really loved mathematics, but I didn't really want to be a professor, so I became a math teacher in the US Peace Corps. Loved that super rural part of Southern Africa. Came back, and the lucky break of my life was getting in a Stanford grad school in AI 30 years ago. And it was a very different AI than today, but it set off just a lifelong curiosity about humans, technology, how it all comes together. Then I got super lucky again and created a very technical software company in the 90s that did well. And that was my evolution from engineer to CEO. I had never managed a person at all. And then suddenly I was CEO of this company because I had the first idea. That company doubled every year for 6-7 years. Morgan Stanley took us public in 1995. It was a big deal at the time, but I was not a very good CEO. Good product person, so we kept growing. But as a leader, pretty rough. And Netflix for me has been redemption. It's been a chance to really refine and understand and reflect on leadership and learn so much from all the people that have written books before now. And this book, No Rules Rules, is sort of my contribution back to the system that I've learned so much from, which is other people writing books.
Well, certainly Netflix has been amazing to look at as an outsider. It's been a story of these radical shifts in strategy every few years, it seemed like. Really bold, occasionally almost reckless. There was a switch from being a mail, movies delivered on DVD and returned to streaming, which was a little awkward in how it happened, but was so important and key to your future. But then I think an even more surprising shift for me was, I guess, a little more than 7 years ago, when suddenly you started producing your own content, like House of Cards. When that deal was announced, I think a lot of people said, wait a second, this is never going to work. These guys are nerdy internet guys, just doing a fine distribution service, licensing other people's content. But I mean, this is craziness. This is hubris, trying to create your own content. And then, wait a sec, it actually worked. And the way I almost read your book is to say, yeah, exactly. There was always more to this company than sort of technical skills. There was this obsession with empowering innovation, and that I'm sure you would argue that it was fundamentally that which allowed things like the whole shift to House of Cards happen. Is that fair, that you credit? There's an individual story about that shift, but at heart there was this culture of innovation and excellence. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, we do think of it as the culture has allowed us to, create this business initially with DVD by mail. And, when we went public 20 years ago, we were about 50 million in revenue. Blockbuster was over 5 billion, so 100 times larger than us. And that was a heck of a battle for 6-7 years because, they were a good firm. They weren't a bad firm at all. And then to figure out streaming, from DVD, and then to figure out original content and to be able to go global. It's a lot of change in 20 years. And at root, we do think it's the culture that really enables that kind of innovation.
Well, your book starts with quite an entertaining story of how you tried to sell yourselves to Blockbuster for $50 million way back in the early days, and they kind of laughed and turned you down. Would probably take a different decision now to have the choice again. But Reed, someone could say that story of your conquering Blockbuster isn't necessarily a story about a superior culture. It could easily be explained by just, it's another internet story. You had a fundamentally better business model for the era, distributing videos over the internet at whatever, a few cents or less to deliver a movie is just fundamentally a better idea than making people walk to a store, pay huge late fees when they don't physically return the actual product. Of course, the convenience of online streaming was ultimately going to win.
Yeah, I agree with you. We've seen that story of internet company against incumbent many times. And so I hear you it's great, but it's not that unique. But then the unique part is not getting stuck in that, but then pivoting that business so much.
Right. And the fact that you've successfully done that several times does give a lot of credence to your belief that there is something special in the waters over there. So talk to me about what some of that specialness is. I see in the book basically three things repeated again and again, and they feed each other to the point where you actually, the way you've structured this book, there's a cycle of three that's repeated each time of kind of, level 1, level 2, level 3 of three different things. What are those three different things? I mean, start with this notion of talent density, I think you call it. What is that?
Well, if you have the right people together, amazing things can happen. I think everybody knows that. We're just more clear that we're willing to pay a price to achieve that. So everybody tries to hire well. There's no real difference in everyone's ambition in that direction. What's different about Netflix is the keeper test. And what we say is for managers is, would their people, if they were leaving to go to another company, would we try to change their mind to keep them? We would fight to keep them. And if we fight to keep them, great. If there's someone that you wouldn't fight to keep, we say give them a generous severance package, 4 to 6 months of compensation now, and let them go find a place that's a better match. And let us find a great new talent that may be one of those great people.
And when you find that great talent, you are willing to pay the absolute top of market price to get them.
Yeah, I mean, again, the economic insight is the best people perform 10 or 100 times better than the typical. And so there's a big premium in our business to getting the best people, even if it costs you twice as much, because you've got people who are many times more effective. And that's an aspect of creative work generally. the best authors, the best software writers, the best actors. It's across many industries that are creative.
So talk a bit more about that, because you distinguish in the book between creative roles and operational roles. The advice you're giving here doesn't necessarily apply in the same way to operational roles that you call it. It's sort of more routine work that there would just be less variance on what a super talented or committed person could do versus a less committed.
Big picture, we've had 300 years of the factory driving our economy and economic growth and prosperity and wealth. So it's natural that the paradigm of the factory, the top boss, the line worker who, follows the rules, that has a lot of influence in our culture. And the other big model is the family. And you've got family firms. And what we're trying to say is those are good for some things. But for creative work, there's a different model. In a factory, you control people, you supervise them. But in creative work, you want to inspire them. You want to excite them. And that's completely different. And yet many people still run creative firms almost as if they want it to be a factory. I know, because I did it in our first company in Pure Software. Every time something went wrong, I would put a process in place to try to make sure that thing didn't go wrong again. And that works in the short term, but it makes you very rigid. And then the market shifted. In that case, it was C++ to Java, but they all shift in some way. And we were unable to adapt, partially because we had all these processes and we had people who wanted to follow them. So this is where the subtlety is. You really want to focus on flexibility rather than efficiency. And there's so much literature from manufacturing about setting objectives, holding people accountable, efficiency. And all of that stuff works for factories. And there's a better way for creative work, which is focusing on inspiration.
So talk a bit more, because it's certainly, I think it's known that in something like software writing, that a brilliant programmer really can perform 100 times better than an average programmer. And that you can have circumstances where a single programmer could outperform a team of literally 100 other programmers. But does that apply in other creative areas? Like when you talk about the exponential skills of a super talented creative person, does that mean that you literally can hire far fewer people, or is it just that the output of their work will actually be more impressive?
You can hire fewer people. So it would be better in highly creative work to have 5 people that were incredibly talented working on some given project. And that could be making a movie, it could be making marketing campaign, could be winning an election, or it could be writing software. Then 10 or 100 people who were less good. So that's why we talk about it as talent density, getting super talented people, and they thrive on each other. And then they thrive on freedom, which is the next part of what we work on.
Let's come to that in a minute. This reminds me of the story of Gideon in the Bible, where he was originally had a force of 32,000 men up against the Midianites that were a much bigger army. And the strategy was actually to let go of most of them. He let go of the ones who were afraid. He would let go of the ones who couldn't drink water the right way, whatever. He ended up with a force of 300 men who actually then still beat the enemy. And so step one is almost have lean but brilliant teams, and be willing to let go of people who not who are bad, but who are merely solid.
That's right. And remember, it's not just about the individual performance. It's about how the individual works with a team, because everything we do is teamwork. And teamwork is a skill. I mean, most people want it, but only a few people are so good that they know when to do a blind pass or when to reach out and let their teammate know about things. So remember, it's both the individual talent and the team skill. So the analogy we use a lot is professional sports. You know, if you want to have world-class and World Cup winning teams, you need to assemble an amazing group of people at every position.
And you actually use the word team almost in contradistinction to family. A lot of organizations, including at TED, we've sometimes used this language. We say, we're a family here. And that is supposed to generate this warm, supportive, loving culture. You've actually said, no, that's actually probably not the right metaphor. Go with teams, which are where there's more competitive, and you are actually willing to do things that you would never do to a family member. You can't fire your sister.
No, that's exactly right, which is, you know, the family is really about unconditional love. And, you know, if your sister steals from you, you still love her. And, you know, if your brother does something awful, you still love him. And so families can be very dysfunctional, but we admire them for loyalty above all, that they stick with each other. And that's how I want to be as a family member also. But then a team is really about performance, and it's about contribution and about effectiveness with other people.
But some people may listen to that and kind of react in shock and saying, wait a second, you're talking about inviting people to come to your company, and that they're going to be terrified the whole time that they're not measuring up, that they may have to leave. Isn't this a recipe for like a toxic work culture?
Well, again, think of athletics. You know, an athlete could get injured in any game and end their career. And do they walk around terrified? No. You know, what they do is they have the discipline to lean into the joy of play, of winning, and, you know, the hunger of the excellent teammates. And so, you know, people get used to moving forward, and they understand, if you're clear that it's a team, that not everyone will be on the team. And they maintain the friendships, and, you know, we're friends with all the people that have been cut from Netflix. And it's like an Olympic team. If you've had a friend who's been on one of those and then they get cut, I mean, it's very sad. It's disappointing. It's heartbreaking, but there's no shame in it. I mean, to compete at that elite level, it's, you know, fantastic.
So a second leg of your three-legged stool is candor. Talk about that. There's this unique sense of transparency to a point that would really shock some people.
Well, you know, I grew up aspiring to be kind, okay, and aspiring to be liked, and certainly not aspiring to cause pain. And so I avoided conflict. When all that time I was a bad CEO, I would, you know, never deal with conflict because I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. And I had my wife and I had the most amazing marriage counselor in now 25 years ago. And he got me to see that I was just systematically lying about everything. Because I would say things like family is the most important thing. And then I would stay at work in the evening if some employee had a problem, and I would ignore my family. I mean, so I was just so disconnected from the reality. And he got me to see that living more honestly would be much better about, you know, trade-offs between work and family and other things. And he did wonders for my marriage. And a couple of days ago, we had our 29th wedding anniversary, so that's great. But relative to work, he got me to be an honesty-seeking CEO instead of a kind-seeking. And so now can be very straightforward about performance and what's happening. And you know, I don't like causing pain, but it's more, again, like athletic training. So your trainer is there saying, you know, give me 5 more push-ups, and that hurts, okay? But you do it, okay? And because you realize when you're exercising, that pain is helping you be stronger. It's the same thing with good feedback, with candor, is that it can hurt. It still hurts me sometimes, but done well, it produces growth, and that's what's so stimulating.
So you have this team of super high performers, and their instructions are to be willing to take, if necessary, brutally honest feedback from each other so that they can learn, so that they can grow, even if it hurts.
Yeah, I mean, we would try to minimize the brutality, just like in a workout. You don't want a workout to be brutal. That doesn't make you stronger. You want a workout to be constructive and productive. I mean, occasionally it might feel brutal, but honestly, that's not what we admire. What we admire is thoughtful feedback with positive intent that's really helping a person get better at what they do.
And you adopt this yourself. You're willing to take criticism from people anywhere in the company.
Yeah. So it's so important, generally in everything, it's important to be a role model as a leader. But in particular in feedback, because of the power dynamics, you really have to create an openness for people to give you feedback by giving them psychological rewards. That was so great, by lauding them. And we do things to farm for dissent. So let's say there's a decision about, what should we do about the pandemic, and, what should we, then we would open it up for discussion. And then we want each person to weigh in with, do they think it's a good idea or bad idea to say close down or whatever the issue is. Another thing we do is run an exercise. What would be different if you were CEO instead of me? And it's a way of people writing down. Some people say things like, well, lunches would be better, but, fairly trivial. And other people say things of, we would be in the video game market and here's why. And other people would say, all different things. So think of these all as devices that we have in the book that are ways of farming for dissent as the general principle.
I mean, in the book, you talk through, 4 instances that are really quite surprising. I think your co-author, Erin Meyer, puts these 4 tough questions to you on candor, and in each case the answers, at least to me, were quite surprising that you were willing to go there. So one of them was the instance you're a public company, you're about to announce your quarterly results. Do you let employees internally know those numbers ahead of time, knowing that anyone who leaks that information could go to jail? Or do you do what most companies do and keep that information absolutely tightly controlled? Which way do you go?
We go open with the information at Netflix. But in my first company, of course, we spent elaborate time making sure that no one could see this and this. And we had information controls and compartmentalization. And it's like all a big power trip. And really, when you think about it, if you think about risks, there's short-term risks, which would not be good if somebody leaks the information. And there's long-term risks, which is employees understand, they feel power, they feel in control, they feel special. And organizations really have many more risks of the latter, sort of employee alienation, than they do about potentially someone leaking something. So, for us, we want to be, very transparent, very open with employees, have them feel very trusted. And what we get back is then this sense of commitment that they have, and that they really go the extra mile because they care, because they feel it's unique. And so just like our unlimited vacation, this sharing the earnings numbers, there's sort of big symbolism. That is, we don't beat Blockbuster or HBO because we release our numbers and they don't, okay? But it's part of creating a culture that's unique and open and candid.
So you tell people, I mean, they're clear what the rules are, that it's illegal for them to share this information, but nonetheless you share it. And you also share like key company strategy documents that would be invaluable to a competitor. You're willing to trust even like new employees with that information. Has that really never come back to bite you?
No, it has come back to bite us. So think about it as there are lots of little bites you get in sharing information. Okay, it's not perfect, but you recognize that what that does, you get an exchange of that openness for all the other people, is you get a great sense of buy-in, of commitment, of uniqueness. And then if you think about the risks, again, in my first company, which didn't work out as well, every time there was a small bite, I wanted to fix that problem. Okay. And then you get more and more rigid, more process, more control of information. And so but in the short term, it's fine. Okay. It's just that sometimes we call it as like building up barnacles on a boat, right? And then no one ever takes the time to scrape them. And eventually it sinks you. So that's why we try to always invest in that openness and candor.
Another example that was put to you was, okay, so what if the company is thinking about some kind of restructuring, and a manager is told that several of her employees has a 50% chance of losing their job? Should that manager tell those employees that their jobs may be at risk? What's your recommendation on candor in that circumstance?
To lean into the candor and to tell the potential, the employee with the potential job losses about it, and to get their opinion on it and involve them. And we try to develop, mature thinking people. And I'm not saying it doesn't scare them, it does. But on balance, they would rather be involved in the decision and then are more effective on executing it if we're, changing in some way like that. So, we really want people to be involved and trusted. And it is harder. If you want to have a simple job where you don't have to think and you can just work, 8 to 5 and have no worries, we're not the right place. And if you're the kind of person that wants to grow and learn and understand more, and you're willing to be challenged in various ways, then you love Netflix.
I mean, is this an instance where, again, these two legs belong together, that it's only because you're recruiting and retaining people who are strongly talented and know they are, that you can afford to have a culture which gives them absolutely honest criticism at times? Because for many people would say, no, that would crush someone's confidence and they then won't perform, that you need to anchor your management style on encouraging people and praising them and so forth. And you're often being willing to do the opposite. So is it only because you start with this talent density?
Exactly. So it's an ecosystem. And it's why in the book, we kind of help people think about how to evolve towards it. You wouldn't want to change overnight, to do all these things. It's too radical. It's like you can take this step, try it, see how it works. And you build confidence over time in doing all these steps, including, setting context and all the things we have coming up.
So then talk about the next leg of the stool, the third leg here. Controls. When you have these other things in place, you can afford to do something pretty radical in terms of the way that companies normally control what employees do. Talk about that.
We want our leaders to be great teachers, okay? To be, again, inspirational and not to be controlling. Think of we're trying to get away from the factory paradigm where they set the rules, you follow them as the worker. And we're trying to really show people you don't need these controls. And some of the symbolic things in that are things like no limits on vacation. And it's really just symbolic, okay? Because it's not, again, like we beat Blockbuster, or HBO because, we have unlimited vacation and they don't. But it's one more aspect of trusting people. And think about it just logically. We don't know how many hours a person works in a day. Are they working 8 hours a day, 10, 12? We don't track any of that. So why should we track whether they take work for 48 weeks or work for 46 weeks or work for 50 weeks? It's in the noise. So people say, well, what if somebody takes, too much vacation? And I'm like, we don't have a clothing policy, and yet people don't come to work naked. So why is that? And that's because they have a cultural belief about it's appropriate to wear clothing in the office. So it's the same kind of thing about vacation. People have expectations, and that works. And then the other fear potentially is that no one takes vacation because, you don't know how much you could take. But, I take a lot, try to set a great example that way. And people have great vacations and great lives and also accomplish a lot of work.
So this is definitely head scratching for some people thinking about this. They go, but wait a sec. there would always be someone who would cause huge annoyance by abusing this policy and constantly taking time off. What happens then? That person just gets fired because they're suddenly no longer really supporting the culture? How do you avoid that?
Well, let's take a case of someone takes every other month as vacation, but they're just incredibly productive. And when they come back, they've got all these fresh ideas that like are amazing. I mean, you know, I would fight to keep that person. So it's really not about, you know, how many hours you're in the office or how much you work. It's trying to get to the contribution. And let's take a case where, you know, if someone did abuse it. Sure, but again, that might be 1 in 100, 1 in 50. And the whole theory here is we're not focused on efficiency. We're focused on flexibility and inspiration. So you have to say there's going to be lots of little things going wrong, but in the big scheme of things, so what? And what you really want to care about is a group of people who are just always trying to think creatively. How do we serve the customers better? How do we grow the business? And if you've got everyone thinking independently about, you know, how to please the customers, how to grow the business, it's very powerful.
I mean, you talk a lot in the book about how combined with that letting go of control, you need to establish context so that people basically get a sense. So another control, for example, that you have let go of is expense management. There aren't really expense rules, but there is, I guess, modeling by managers. And I assume that there's some kind of understanding of what is normally okay. For example, the circumstances where someone could just book a, you know, business class flight, for example, versus economy, that becomes part of the cultural expectation somehow.
Yeah, I mean, the guidance or context that we give is do what's in Netflix's best interest. So if you've got to be, you're flying overnight and then you're going right into the office and you've got a big presentation, it definitely makes sense to, you know, get sleep well on the flight and that. So think of it as makes people have to think, you know, is this the right thing to do for Netflix? And if it is, you know, they can order champagne. I mean, you know, if that's the right thing to do and entertaining some, you know, host, it's fine. We don't have to set rules about it. But in general, you may have to defend why it's in Netflix's best interest. And, you know, on occasion, we do have people who, you know, are hugely extravagant and cheat on the system, basically. And then they're gone. But you can't worry about the little mistakes or you'll get consumed with them. What you're trying to do is keep it healthy for everybody else, where it's very simple and they don't have to seek permission, you know, for each little thing.
But humans are very, can easily be annoyed by what is perceived as sort of, I don't know, unfair or, you know, taking the piss behavior by a colleague. Are you sure that there aren't actually lots of little resentments and annoyances going on that actually are quite destructive, when it actually would be quite simple just to give a few guidelines? Isn't what most people want? Like, couldn't you have a variant of your policy where there are basic guidelines in place, but you say to people, look, if there are exceptional circumstances, use your judgment?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe that'll be a little bit better, so, you know, so other companies can try that. Or maybe they find that then once they go to one rule, like if the flight's longer than 8 hours, you could do business class, okay? And then the question comes up, well, what about if it stops somewhere and there's a long layover? And what about if it's overnight? And what about if the business class flight's very cheap? And it's like, once you start getting into specifying rules, there's no end. It just goes on and on. So that's why we do the general principle, which in this one, the original general principle was spend the money as if it was your own, okay? And then there was two problems with that, which is sometimes people would be like, I know when I travel myself, I do extravagant travel, that's how I travel, okay? And then you got the opposite, which is, no, when I travel personally, I'm very cheap, but I don't do it very often. And, you know, I have to travel for work a lot. And so I want to travel differently than I do personally. So that was a case where we saw over time that our context, which was spend as if it was your own money, was not correct. and we adjusted it to be spending it as you think is in Netflix's best interest.
So when you put these pieces together, you have this philosophy of what you call freedom plus responsibility. It's sort of you replace the whole panoply of policies and rules and just say, you basically say, get talented people, let them do their thing, but let them own the outcome of that thing.
That's right. So you can think of it as the macro thing is use good judgment. Okay. And then you're going to have some mistakes, but the whole point of it is those don't really matter in the success of the company over multi-decades. Okay. What matters in success of the company over multi-decades is the new ideas. So everything's organized around, let's have, this fertile. So the old world is sterile, follow the rules, factory. Okay. And the world we're trying to create is fertile. And it's a little bit chaotic and it's dirty and it's messy and mistakes get made, but ideas get generated and there's fresh thinking and people are independently trying to think what's good for the customers, what's good for the company, how do we grow? And that's very powerful. And it overwhelms essentially the small amount of little mistakes that come that all those controls are trying to serve.
So put those pieces together, Reed, and give an example of how this culture has allowed talent to be attracted and to flourish, that has been able to successfully take on the world's giant studios with all their creative talent. How on earth is it that you've been able to, coming from this sort of tech background, be able to come in and produce content that competes? The early story I always heard was that, you had all this data that they didn't have, and you could see what kind of users actually wanted. How much is it that the story versus attracting genuinely brilliant creative people and empowering them?
Yeah, it's definitely not the data. So there's lots of data about what television shows people watch from Nielsen. There's lots of data of box office for film. So all of our competitors have lots of data too. That's not. The difference is we have lots of people in our content group that can make decisions. In a major studio or network, every decision gets reviewed 5 levels up and, micromanaged. And what we do is we have lots of independent people who are then making decisions, big decisions, about what content to do and why. And some of them won't work out. Okay. Some of them will be a mistake, but that's okay. And because if you get, Orange is the New Black, and you get Stranger Things, and you get The Old Guard, you get, these big successes. So it's really organized around distributing power. I talk about how a perfect quarter for me is one where I've made no decisions. All I've done is advocate, influence, inspire. And, I do have to make some decisions, like promoting Ted to COO, Ted Sarandos, who's been with us for more than 20 years. So again, I do make some, but they're as few as possible, because what we wanted to do is to really have the other people make the decisions. And again, that's worked extremely well in content, because then we can attract very talented people out of CBS, out of HBO, because they get to make decisions and they get to run independently.
So Stranger Things was obviously this breakout hit. Give us the story of how that arrived at Netflix. How did that come to be made by Netflix?
Well, there's a lot of people in Hollywood kind of talking all the time across firms and agencies and pitching ideas. And in that particular case, the script had been seen by, many people. And our team, one of our team, thought this is going to be amazing. And again, it wasn't obvious, reading the script that it was. But, we were willing to let people take bets. And then, this show with its, kind of unique 80s retro and the kids, became this warm but slightly scary kind of story that families could enjoy. And it really took off. So, but we've had equally number shows that did not. So again, what you want to do is inspire people to take risks and take chances, because the winners are so much more important, than the ones that don't become big.
So is that actually an important principle in it? If you're running a creative business, expect to have a lot of failure, and it's worth embracing those. And much better to empower people to try lots of things, and that's your best shot at getting genuine breakout hits, which is ultimately what will drive the business.
A way to think about it is innovation requires variation. You have to try things differently, right? And in manufacturing, Six Sigma, all that stuff, you're trying to reduce variation. The fundamental manufacturing paradigm is to reduce variation. And the fundamental creative innovation paradigm is to increase variation. But we haven't rethought all the other things like freedom and the things we're talking about from the industrial era. So we've still got lots of post-industrial thinking or industrial thinking influencing how creative organizations are run. And again, all that stuff is good for industrial companies. And I'm glad they do that for running a factory. But for creative companies, all that needs to be really rethought. And this is just starting that conversation.
How much of your model is dependent on not that many other people following it? I mean, just to take the policy of paying at top of market, if every company did that, you get massive pay inflation. Why are you releasing the secret? You actually don't want other companies to do this.
Let's think about Major League Sports. Okay, then it's open and competitive, and athletes do move between teams, and and people are paid top of their market, when they switch teams, and that generates incredible amount of athleticism and ratings. And so just because our competitors are also paying top of market doesn't, or even move the market, doesn't ruin it for everybody else, makes it great for employees. But if your macro question is, this could be a great trade secret advantage, all the things you do, why share it at all? And we did debate that, but the challenge is we want to make sure new candidates really know what they're getting into. It's not fair to hire them and not tell them. And so that's when we released the original culture memo 10, 12 years ago, culture deck, that was for candidates. And we knew if we're going to give it to all these candidates, of course, it's going to get out and get public. So, it's operating openly in this way is required really for our employees or our candidates to know what they're getting in for.
You had a wonderful partner in crime in terms of developing these ideas and putting out that culture deck and so forth. Who was that? Talk a bit about her.
Sure. Patty McCord was our longtime and founding head of HR. And I had worked with her also back at Pure Software, so earlier. So we had a great relationship. And she's very willing to rethink things. She's very untraditional. She had grown up in traditional HR at all the classic companies. But she really thought there's a new ways and fresh ways to do things. And so she's been a major driver of that. And then by probably 2012, she had been, with us for 13 or 14 years. It wasn't working as well for us, and we had a lot of discussions about it, back to the feedback and living it. And she was like, if you really feel that way, you should get someone else. And we realized that was true. She left with our generous severance package, and some people were shocked. But for her and for me, it was just living the culture.
Wow. And the fact that you're saying this now is an amazing example of how you believe candor should be done. That, like most organizations, if someone leaves, there's a bit of a dance and a song and a story is created and all the rest of it. Your recommendation is say it like it is.
Yeah, and people respect, again, there's a tension between kindness and honesty. We admire both of those, okay? So we're not trying to be unkind, but we want to give each other permission to be honest and thoughtful. And, but not cruel, not brutal. We don't. Those are all negatives. But you can be honest and respectful, and people do respect that.
Reed, what would you say to people who say you're missing an absolutely key piece of what it takes to run a team in the 21st century, which is to be much more obsessed about diversity, that traditionally creative industries have been run by a sort of elite, well-educated, often white sort of group of creatives. How much of an emphasis should there be on diversity, and can that actually further improve performance?
I think it can, and it's a big focus for us, and of course for other firms, starting several years ago. And it's part of a cultural evolution of how do we be more inclusive of different ways of being. Of course, there's race and gender, sexual orientation, but also nationality. We're a company now that's about 1/3 US customers, 2/3 not in the US. And we're trying to build up our management team outside of the US in the same way. We're hiring and developing our leaders of color. Of our top 20 people, we're half men, half women. So it took us a while to get there, but we've got there now. We're 25% leaders of color. We're making a big difference in that, and trying just to continue to say, what can we do more in this dimension? But I think it's a long overdue, incredibly important, and it's been a big focus for us.
And how easy or hard have you found it to take your culture globally?
It depends where. So, the more similar the underlying culture is, like the Dutch are very direct, and, that works well. And then the English have a kind of odd, like reverse sarcasm thing they do when they're trying to give you feedback and, faint praise. So, and then, the Japanese expect you to be able to read the air, and it's like, wait, you said this, and it's like, no, you weren't direct, because we're so direct, and the Brazilians are so relationship oriented. So the world is really wonderfully unique. And so what we try to do is have our Americans recognize they have one way, it's not the only way, and that we all need to learn how to communicate effectively together. And that's kind of everybody learning from each other and then meeting each other part way.
There was one other thing that you don't talk about that surprised me a bit. It just in terms of attracting and holding talent. You talk a lot about paying a lot. You don't talk much about mission. And like someone like Elon Musk would say, the reason I can hire some of the world's best engineers is because they're part of the creating a sustainable future, etc. Is mission not just as important as how much you pay people?
No, I think it is. For us, it's entertain the world, and how do we bring people together through all of the stories that we tell, and that plays a significant role. But I think people also want to be stimulated on. They want to grow in their career. There's a number of things they want. And we wouldn't want mission to be used as a way to pay people less, basically. But they're both super important.
Reed, you've made a fortune from Netflix and have become an innovative and generous philanthropist. Talk just a bit about how you think about your philanthropy, and whether you've come up with some sort of equally radical principles, if you like, to guide how you think about the right way to do philanthropy.
I'd have to say I'm still very much learning mode. I've been doing philanthropy for 20 years in one particular area, which is around charter public schools. But I'm just learning on a more broad basis on kind of African farmers or U.S. college education, from my peer group. And I'm still so excited by Netflix and growing Netflix that, I'm in the phase where it's a slice of time. but I want it to be growing. And that's why I feel so good about promoting Ted Sarandos to co-CEO and, sharing that load with me, which will give me a little more time on philanthropy eventually. So I'm a beginner still in that field, but very active, and I find it very satisfying.
I mean, we're in a economic structure right now where it seems that inequality will continue to grow, meaning that certainly that the wealthy will probably continue to get even wealthier. I mean, do you feel that there is, how do you think about the obligation of that? How do you think about the opportunity of that? Is there almost, is there more, should there be more conversation about, given the vast amounts of private capital that are sitting out there now, about the best way to deploy that, versus, for example, just revolutionizing the tax structure and giving it more to governments to spend? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, inequality is growing, but it's just a policy choice. If the people and the government wanted to do sufficient taxation and then have free public health care, free public universities, then you'd see a more equal society. And America, relatively uniquely in the world, has always had the tradition of very high on freedom and less on equality, whereas our European colleagues have much more equal societies. But then we have a high inheritance tax, and generally Europeans don't. So there's some cases where we're more egalitarian. And I think all of us are trying to learn, how do you have a great society, one that we're proud of, one that's prosperous and provides people, with real nourishment.
Reed, why did you have a co-author on this book?
Well, over the years, I've read so many CEO pontification books. And I've often wondered, I wonder what the reality is in the company. That all sounds good, but, I'm a little skeptical. And so we wanted to address that. So we hired a very independent voice, an accomplished business school professor and author, Aaron Meyer, to interview over 100 mid-level Netflix employees around the world, and then to write honestly their view. So the book somewhat is me doing the theory and her doing the reality as she found it. And that tension is part of what gives the book its interest.
Yes, that really comes through. I think she says herself that when she first saw the Netflix culture deck several years ago, she reacted badly to it. She thought, oh my goodness, this is a recipe for a toxic culture. And you won her over to participate, and I think persuaded her a lot of the wisdom of what you've created there.
Well, she's been a great teacher, and she gave the book really all of its readability.
So at the heart of your idea is hiring truly great creative people and then giving them a lot of freedom. They can work whatever hours they want, take whatever vacation they want, and manage their own expense policy, etc. For that to work, don't you have to have some kind of pretty robust way of knowing whether they're being effective? And creative work is notoriously hard to measure in some ways. Like, is that actually working? How can you tell who's actually being effective and who is a superstar and who actually should be given the generous package and asked to leave?
It is super hard with creative work because it often takes a couple of years to play out if this new idea is something. So where it's measurable, we try to measure it, but that might only be like half, I would say, of the creative choices that we make. Like, you could look at two shows and see which one got a big audience. Okay, or you can A/B test something on the service, so that helps. But in many parts of the company, like let's say HR, when we're creative and we have a new policy, is it better or is it not? We just have to use judgment and leaning into that. And then we would talk about it, did this thing work out? Or, generally, are these ideas working out? So it's imperfect. I'm sure we're making some mistakes in it. But if you lean into judgment, I think it works well.
So one of the super talents you're trying to recruit for is actually people with the capability of providing sophisticated judgment of others and really getting a sense of whether they have the goods or not.
Absolutely. And for Ted and I as co-CEOs, it's paramount for us to ultimately have good judgment of, are we going in the right direction, going after the right customers with the right approach? So there's a lot of judgment from us also.
Mm. And so just, I think I just want to end by asking you a bit about the future of Netflix. We've just been through this pandemic where many people have transferred a huge amount of time from the physical world to the virtual world. We've spent all this time on screens and Zoom meetings, watching Netflix and other services. And some people say they're sick of it. I think other people are shocked by how good parts of it have been, that they, wow, and they've almost seen that the future could be permanently different. Could the future be permanently different? How would you like it to be permanently different? And what are you dreaming about in terms of how you could contribute to that difference?
So COVID has accelerated, and work from home in particular, our use of video conferencing significantly. It's been the dream of work for 30 years, that you could work from home and have be in Wyoming or the Alps and and do your job. But the technology has not been good enough, and it's only barely good enough now. So, but it will continue to improve. So think of it as it's a journey. We're moving towards that. And COVID has accelerated it and moved it more into the mainstream. But it would have happened anyway. It would have just taken a few more years. So I think mostly post-COVID, people will go back to bars and restaurants and sports events and movie theaters. And, a lot of our life will be pretty similar, but it'll be a little more flexible in terms of doing video meetings.
And what's the role of Netflix in this future? Are you pretty determined to keep the main focus on pre-recorded content, whether it's TV shows or movies, or are there debates and dreams afoot in the company to expand beyond that? For example, into interactivity. I think video games in general have been a huge winner in the pandemic, and a lot of people have just got lost in these sort of virtual worlds. Do you have a role to play in that, or in other areas that you're dreaming about?
We're really focused in the joy in people's lives and creating that sense of escape and connection that all of us use entertainment for. So not really doing news, not teaching calculus. But many people find the joy from learning something new, from a documentary about an issue, from coming to understanding. And so we're definitely do a lot of documentary and nonfiction programming, and then fun things that could be real time or not, like Floor is Lava, and it's this competition show that's very cute. And then there's, of course, just great epic entertainment, great filmed entertainment. And today we do some interactive entertainment that's, you can kind of choose your own adventure style where you get to, figure out what you want to do that we've done with Bandersnatch. So we'll do more of that. Not sure on video gaming's probably, nothing in the short term, but, maybe eventually something in that space. Right now where it's console based and, it's pretty specific. It's pretty specific in terms of who uses it. It's not as general as movies and series in terms of its cultural breadth. So there's, a lot going on in entertainment.
Do you care or measure different, if you like, benefits of entertainment? I mean, there's definitely a lot of joy, a lot of sort of compulsive viewing, binge viewing that you've driven. Documentaries, you could argue, people learn from, and there's a sort of educational role. Other forms of entertainment maybe bring families together. Is there any sort of discussion internally about, like, there are certain things that you give yourself especially big bonus checks for? I don't mean literally, but like check marks for, and that you try to incent? Or is it all, if it adds up to new subscribers and more hours viewing, then it's all the same? How do you think about that?
So we think about it as trying to serve our members. And if a documentary is what our member chooses it, we love it that much. Okay, so and we try not to project our own particular tastes, which skew somewhat elite, and say this is good for you, and this is broccoli, and this is ice cream. So we have ice cream on our service, we have broccoli, and we let people choose, openly, and value it by basically the proportion that it's chosen.
But don't people criticize their own choices in retrospect, as it were? So often people, like I have a habit of choosing ice cream, whereas my beautiful wife chooses broccoli. I actually, after the experience of eating it, feel healthier after the broccoli, AKA foreign language documentary, whatever, than after the ice cream of some sci-fi or, comedy, entertainment or whatever. Do you ask people afterwards, was this time well spent? Are you happy? What would you like more of this on Netflix at all? And is that a different algorithm?
It's not a different algorithm, but I would say we do try to understand satisfaction and what entertainment, like if you ask people what they remember from the past year of what they watched. And then we do try to do more on shows that they remember. Okay, which made an impact, as opposed to pass the time, and but think of it as if it was really great ice cream and you could remember that taste of that strawberry ice cream on a summer day, then that counts for us just as much as the broccoli. So it's really about the emotional impact on the person that they can remember it.
Well, Reed, you've built an absolutely incredible company, and I think these principles are really, really powerful. I think lots of people are going to ponder what they can take from them, and so congratulations on a very, very, very provocative and easy to absorb book. Easy to absorb, possibly hard to put into practice for some people.
Well, it'll stimulate the conversation of what's the best way to stimulate and support creativity. And that's what we want to do, and can't wait for No Rules Rules to get out there.
Thanks so much for this time. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear from you.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you.